Hi, my name is Abby Hurd, and this is my presentation on appropriate use and copyright laws for educational purposes. I first want to start off with the point that the internet is extremely accessible to anyone in the entire world, which is very, very good. There are pros and cons to that. But if we don't educate our students and we don't educate the youth of America and the world on how to appropriately use the materials that they find and on the copyright laws that are out there for protecting the creators of works of art out there and pretty much anything that you can find on the internet, then we're not doing a very good job. Then we're not getting credit where credit is due, and I think that it's really important that we start at a young age on educating by example. We educate our students on these laws, and we educate them on appropriately using materials. And educating by example, I mean by us as educators ourselves learning these laws and appropriately using materials that we find online so that we can present them appropriately to our students, and so that they can see that we're doing the right thing and that it's doable. It's really, sorry, I distracted myself. It's really confusing out there. There are a lot of websites out there that provide ideas for people to take. Basically, one example is the website called Pinterest. This website is a place where anybody can post their idea or post a recipe or pretty much anything on the website, and it's just there for you to grab. And that can be confusing to youth. It's confusing to me because it's like, this is here for me to take, so why can't I take this? But that's why we're, as educators, we're informed on the laws and the uses that are appropriate and the uses that are not appropriate. So I think that it's important to take what we know and we educate by example in our classrooms when we present a project for a lesson plan, that we cite our sources and we appropriately use the materials that we found online, and we make sure to make that a point in our lesson that we did those things. Since it is confusing, it's kind of still confusing for me still after we've done so much research on appropriate use and copyright laws. It's just out there. It's everywhere, and technology is always evolving, it's always changing, and so it's hard to kind of keep up with what's right and what's wrong. So the most important thing that I want to stress to my students and let them know is that if you don't know what's right and what's wrong, to ask. If you're unsure whether you're violating copyright laws, ask. Get permission. Get permission from the creator or the appropriate person that is in charge. So that could be an administrator or other teachers that are in your school district on whether or not you're using the materials appropriately. The internet also, you can research on the internet with reputable sources to figure out if you're doing things right or wrong. Here also are the definitions of appropriate use. Appropriate use is the ability for educators to copy, distribute, and modify work for educational purposes. Copyright laws is the legal protection for a creator of a creative piece, and this creative piece is practically anything that's tangible that can be copyrighted. So those are important definitions to know. Later on I'll have examples of appropriate use, and I'll have examples of violating copyright laws, so we'll get into that just a little bit later. One important thing that I like to ask myself when I'm researching and when I'm going to be using materials that are online from somebody else, I like to ask myself, do I want to transform someone else's work? And when I say transform, I mean adding value to it and repurposing something to make it what I need for the audience that I'm presenting to. So anybody out there can write a book or a story or play a song, make up a song about, for example, the solar system. That would be a very typical lesson that we are going to be teaching as educators to our students. But each classroom is different, and every student learns differently, and so it's important to transform materials that you find online into something that you are going to be able to use for your audience. It's a new audience. Every classroom is a new audience, so transforming it. Also, you have to pay very close attention to the amount of work that you're going to be using. The smaller the amount of work that you're using is most likely going to be you're not copywriting. You're going to be appropriately using if you use just bits and pieces here and there of somebody else's work. Cite the sources. That's really important. Sometimes it's hard because you just get so involved in the work that you're doing that you might forget, but that's one of the very important thing to do is to cite your sources and double check those websites and make sure that you're using a reputable source so that while you're presenting, you are using facts, you're using things that are, I guess, reputable. I already used that word, but you're going to be teaching by example. There's a lot out there. It's very accessible, and a lot of it is good, very much good, and a lot of it's bad. And you have to use those reputable sources and research and double check your website so that you are not using things inappropriately, so that you're educating by example and that you're using things appropriately. So I can't stress enough to ask if you don't know. Brush up on your copyright laws. It's right there online. It's how we all researched our projects for this classroom. You just gotta double check them, cite your sources, and always ask. So those are 3 important things that I really want to stress to my students when we're learning about copyright laws, because it is confusing. There's a lot out there. It's always changing. It's always evolving. But asking is always better than doing something the wrong way, because we want to teach by example. We want to do the right thing for our students. Here are some guidelines to consider while you're researching your project. Number 1, are you using materials for educational purposes only? It's pretty important. If you're using materials, you can use materials that you're going to change them exponentially, like for presentations or for instructional purposes. Like I said earlier, you can take bits and pieces, and turn that into something, add value to it, to change it into something that you're going to use for your audience. Number 2, is the material factual or scientific? Factual and or scientific materials can be used. Obviously, they're facts, not going to change, can only change facts, so that would be something that you could add to a project that you're doing for your classroom. Number 3 is how much of the material you're using. The smaller the portion, the more likely you are to be appropriately using the materials. Like I mentioned earlier, take bits and pieces from things. You can't use a whole project or a whole creation from somebody else. That would be copyright. Number 4, what is the market value of the materials you're using? If you're going to be making money off of somebody else's creation, it's not appropriate use. That should be common sense to everyone. If you're going to be using somebody's something and it's a song or it's a book, purchase it. I mean, give credit where credit is due. Do the right thing in that situation. And then if you're going to be using something that somebody else has created and it's going to affect the creator in a negative way, that's not appropriate either, and that should be common sense as well. So those are just some guidelines to consider while you're researching online. So here are some examples of appropriate use. For educational purposes, you can show a recent TV episode or an excerpt of that episode or a news clip to collaborate with the lesson being taught. You could do that, like in my example earlier with the solar system. You could do like a YouTube video or something. If there had been a Discovery Channel episode on the solar system, you could take bits and pieces from that and show students that type of stuff. So that would be fine. Factual and scientific, showing a photo of the solar system to students to collaborate with a science lesson. You could find a photo anywhere online, basically. So you could definitely use that. Just make sure you cite your sources at the bottom. The amount of material, like I said earlier, the smaller the portion, the better. So appropriately using the amount of material that is provided to you online or in a book or something like that is copying an important paragraph, something that really gets to the point and is really important to you. Taking that paragraph from a book, citing your sources, and you could use that to explore writing techniques or have a plot discussion, like the examples that I have here. I know reading a book, a textbook, isn't very exciting, especially for students when they have to. So if you were to just take an important paragraph, get straight to the point, and move on to something more exciting, move on to something more hands-on, that would be appropriately using materials that's not yours. And then, like I said earlier, you cannot take things, well, obviously you can't take things from other people, that would be copyright, but if you're reading a book or playing a song you purchased for your students, then it's totally fine to use the whole book or to use the whole song or the whole movie. If you've purchased it and you've given credit to that creator by paying for their work, then that would be appropriately using materials. So the next one is examples of copyright. So like I said, playing an entire movie with no educational purpose as a reward for good behavior, it kind of, especially in the educational world, you kind of have to have a purpose for using it. You can't just use it just to like fill space, and you're not giving credit where credit is due. You're not teaching, or you're not educating by example. You're not using something and transforming it into your own to share with your students. So that would be an example of copyright for educational purposes. Factual or scientific copyright would be printing or sharing an unrelated story, a poem, or something with your students. Like I said before, it needs to kind of correlate with what's going on. It needs to be educational. It needs to be for instructional purposes only. Earlier, the example that would be appropriate would be a paragraph out of the book that was to the point. And if you're copying an entire book off for your class, or a play script, or a song for music class, that kind of goes along with the market value example there. You kind of can't print off something that's not yours and not pay for it. If you pay for it, then yes, you can share that material with your students. A lot of school districts buy whole books, and they have the whole class read those books. But they've paid for them, they've paid the creator for their work, and then they are appropriately using that material. So as we wrap up this, I've given you some examples of appropriately using material for instructional purposes in the classroom, given you some examples of copyright, but it's always important to remember, even if you do know, to brush up on those laws. Remember to always get permission and ask. You have to ask, because it's better to be right. It's better to educate by example. Like I've said before, the technology today is always changing, and it's right there at your fingertips. I'm not even sure of the statistic, but most students in the United States, at least, have access to the internet. So we need to instill these good habits in our students, in our classrooms, and in everyone, basically, by starting with us and using the materials appropriately, and using those good steps, and citing our sources, and double checking our websites, and making sure that our sources are reputable, so that we can educate our students on the appropriate way to use those materials. Since it's always changing, I mean, have the avenue open that students can come and ask you. Be able to be educated yourself, so that you can answer questions from the students. Know that you have administrators and other teachers in your district that also have ideas and also know a lot about appropriate use and copyright. So it's really important to keep that in mind. Always ask, cite your sources, and double check your website. So that's all I have for you today. Thank you.